Welcome to the Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians. This show is about bringing inspirational, creative, successful, and happy health professionals to you. Get ready to learn how you can be a happy doctor too. What's up, guys? Before our conversation with Dr. Patricia Salber, I wanted to make a few announcements. I'm really excited about a few things with the page and with the podcast that I wanted to share. So first off, I graduated medical school, and it's really weird. So officially, I'm Dr. Brana, and this is really exciting. But in terms of the podcast, it makes me very worried because, I'm going to be really busy. So I had to be creative in terms of how we were going to keep this going. So first big announcement is we've assembled the Happy Doc team. And so now I have people in the background helping out with the process to make it possible for this to continue. And, this team includes pre-med students, it includes residents, it includes medical students, we have an attending physician. So we have a lot of great people throughout the entire process of the medical system, essentially, being a part of this podcast. So that's super exciting. The second thing is we have a new tagline. It's the Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians. And we were really excited about that tagline because it encompasses, what we're looking for. We're not just looking for happiness, we're looking for deep fulfillment, and we want to learn from people who are fulfilled. So we hope you continue to enjoy the conversations we're having with fulfilled physicians. And please let us know how you feel about the tagline, whether that be through our Facebook channel, Twitter, Instagram. Let us know what you think about the tagline. The other feedback we'd like for you guys to share, and this is point number 3, is please leave a 5-star review on iTunes. When people see those reviews, they really take them seriously, and we feel like we're sharing some really great content here. We're really excited about bringing in awesome physicians and health professionals to you to learn from. So if you love the mission of this podcast, please leave a 5-star review on iTunes. With that being said, it's an absolute pleasure to introduce our next guest, Dr. Patricia Salber. Dr. Salber is a certified internal medicine and emergency medicine physician. Furthermore, the course of her career displays quite an impressive path. She was Kaiser Permanente's first director of national accounts. She is a current consultant for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. She speaks and moderates at national and international healthcare conferences. She serves on advisory councils for global nonprofit companies, and she's even involved in the health technology space. Additionally, Dr. Salber still finds time to run her healthcare blog, The Doctor Weighs In, which is described as a global leader in providing reliable, high-quality content to those seeking cutting-edge information about health, healthcare, and innovation. Initially a blog about weight loss in 2005, the blog has developed to cover a wide variety of topics. Enjoy this conversation with Dr. Salber, not just about her blog, The Doctor Weighs In, but also the many things she's learned throughout her career path and how you might apply that to your life. Enjoy the episode. All right. Hello, everyone. This is Taylor, and this is another episode of the Happy Doc. I'm super excited to have our next guest, Patricia Salber, and she's obviously a physician, and she has this great website called The Doctor Weighs In. And so before we move any further, Patricia, could you introduce yourself and explain a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So I am a physician. I trained in internal medicine and practiced emergency medicine for a long time. And about 11 years ago, I started a blog. I was writing about diet and weight loss. And over time, it evolved into what the Doctor Weighs In now, which is a multi-authored healthcare blog. It's health news. We cover everything, mainly because I love everything in healthcare. So there's no topic that I'm not interested in. And we have a lot of people who write for us. We have medical students, we have doctors, we have residents, we have interested others. And it's a really fun thing to do, especially right now when there's so much going on in healthcare.
Sure. And that's great. So it sounds, what I like that I'm hearing about this is you're providing opportunities for many people to chime in and kind of create these blog posts. Now, for those who haven't checked out the page before, can you kind of explain a little further about these posts? Are they more research-based? Are they more functional-based? Are they trying to inspire people? What are the kind of topics and how are they structured?
Sure. Well, we have a variety of topics, again, because I'm interested in everything, but also because we get a lot of stories that come in. I like to say over the transom, but I realize people of your generation don't actually know what a transom is. But they
sure, I honestly have no idea what that means.
I'm not going to waste time explaining it. Really, the way they come in is we get pitched by both PR companies who are representing a lot of different people in the healthcare space. And believe it or not, a lot of doctors go out and end up getting PR agents because they've written a book or they want to, get on blogs, or because they, for whatever reason, they want to build their brand. And then we get a lot of freelancers who write to us as well. And then we have a lot of connections throughout the healthcare industry. So we do have stories that are lifestyle, the 5 ways that you can lose weight quickly and happily, that kind of stuff, because we have a lot of people who like to read that. But we also have a lot of stuff that takes basic science. I'm actually working on one today on a story that's in the latest JAMA, and translate it so it can reach a broader audience, whether that's healthcare people who aren't reading JAMA, or whether it's or the New England Journal, or whatever medical journal, or whether that's lay people who are really interested in the topic and don't find those kinds of journals either easy to access or easy to read. Right.
So it's great because you kind of have this crossover in terms of your reach. You, like you said, you have the lay people, but then you can also hit physicians and medical students and people who are a little bit more immersed in that world. So that's awesome that you have these opportunities for many people to kind of check out the work. I wanted to move and ask you, you obviously developed the Dr. Weighs In. What was the moment that kind of inspired you to go on and create something like this?
Sure. Well, it's an interesting story because as I said, I practiced emergency medicine for a long time, but then I also had a long career working as a physician executive for different health plans, Kaiser Permanente, Blue Shield, Medicare Advantage plan, and so forth. And in an interlude between one of those jobs, I took a position as a chief medical officer for a company called Peer Trainer, which was one of the first peer-to-peer, peer support online weight programs. And I said to them, because I had a background not just in emergency medicine, but I did an endocrinology fellowship, I said, let me start writing, some content for Peer Trainer about obesity and weight loss. So that was the genesis of the blog. I eventually moved it off that site and created the Dr. Weighs In as an independent blog back in the really early days of blogging, when none of us really knew what we were doing. We weren't very technologically savvy, but it became a platform where I could write about a topic that I was really interested in and start to grow an audience, although that wasn't, the initial impetus, because I always kept, during all those years, my full-time physician executive jobs in health plans. As a matter of fact, the history of the blog, how well it did, waxed and waned by, what kind of job I had. If I had one that was big and all-encompassing, then, I didn't post as often. When I was in between opportunities, or decided, as I did a few years ago, that that's really what I want to focus on primarily, is health journalism. Now we put a lot of effort into not only getting a lot of good stories, but also learning all the technical issues around how do you expand your reach, how do you make sure that your website looks good, how do you make, all the technical aspects of actually being able to run a blog as a business.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a part of it, and something people might not even realize when they're going to something like this, right? They get really excited about expressing themselves through blogs and all those things. But if you want to get that deep reach, that you're, referring to, it does get very technical for sure. A question that comes to mind is, we're going into this field of medicine and being a doctor. How did you, obviously you're very inspired to talk about these topics. A lot of people ask me this question too. How do you find the time to really get into this work and develop these articles or build out the website and build these technical skills? How do you get to that point, and how do you build that into your schedule?
Sure. Well, I'm not practicing anymore, so that's probably the biggest answer. Is I have a lot more time. I did have the blog when I had big jobs, and it was a challenge. But now it really is what I do full time, and I have 3 young people who work for me. Employees for the Doctor Weighs In, who help me do it. That's how big of an effort it is to run something that ends up with significant reach.
Sure.
So I don't know if that helps. I would say for people who are listening and would really like to start writing because they, feel like they have something that's really important for them to say, or whether they'd like to, start getting into a career that has writing as a part of it, I would suggest not starting out by creating your own blog because you'll get weighed down by all these, issues around running the blog and the technical issues and the expense and all of that, but rather to figure out where you'd like to have your stories appear and submit them as guest posts. That way, kind of takes the pressure off a little bit, particularly if you're still, practicing medicine or if you're in training. And I'll give you an idea of whether writing on a regular basis, on a frequent basis, is something that you're going to want to do over the long haul.
Yeah, I love that suggestion. So kind of to rephrase, and obviously you're going to be repeating yourself a little bit, but I want to ask the question more specifically. If someone is inspired to write, how would you, putting yourself in their shoes, like just go back in time, how would you start your writing medical career now as a student?
I would send me an email and say, hey, I've got a story to tell. And would you be interested in posting it? And we did actually publish one recently by a resident who wrote about her experiences with her grandparents dying, and it was kind of a horrible, prolonged death. They didn't die at the same time; they died sequentially, and she was very involved with them at the end of their life. And it was actually, I think, the first time that she'd ever seen anybody die. And she came back. She was actually a medical student. I said she was a resident, but she was a medical student, and she actually wrote the story about what she learned about dying from her grandparents' death that's going to help make her a better doctor.
Wow.
And we put it not only on our blog, but we also put it on LinkedIn, and it just got a tremendous response. She really touched a chord. And I think for her, it was really helpful because it solidified something, that she had been thinking about after she went through this experience, and she was able to, articulate it in a way that helped other people to understand and hopefully resonate and learn from those kinds of personal experiences in their life and how to translate that into, what it means to be a physician.
Wow. And that's what I love about a platform such as yours is, that one personal story. First off, she wrote about it, and that took an incredible amount of courage. She submitted it, and now it's being reached by many, many, many people. And that can touch many people's lives. So, what you're doing is really great, and developing this essentially network that spreads this out to many people. That's the power of one voice spreading to many. This is like essentially an online microphone, and that's really great that you provide this opportunity for people. So thank you so much for being on. This is like awesome. Totally cool.
Great. I hope there's budding writers out there in the people that are listening, because people are very interested in the physician voice. They're very interested in learning about what it takes to become a doctor, the trials and tribulations and the learnings, and so I think it's important that docs and doctors in training take the time to do this kind of work.
Sure. Yeah. And expression is huge. Maybe you can comment on this too. I've found, at least in my experience, a lot of medical students and even some of the like residents and maybe doctors, I haven't really gotten to this depth of them as much, but I've had this notice. I've noticed that there's kind of a stifling sometimes of the voice. People are afraid to speak. And this is a great way to express that voice on a larger platform. Do you feel the same way about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can look back on my own training, but also in talking to people who are going through training now, it's true that you come in as one kind of person at the beginning of your training. Remember the first day, the day you got accepted, and you had that wonderful. I don't know if you did, but we had this wonderful talk telling you, now you're going to have all this huge future in front of you, and then over time, kind of your viewpoint as the work piles on and. The stress piles on and the sleep disappears. You kind of find your perspective shrinking, and you lose. I think, hopefully not everyone, but I think a lot of people that I trained with, and I hear it from young people today. You lose some of the compassion and enthusiasm and wonder at medicine as you go through the actual process of becoming a physician. And I know that you started the Happy Doc because that's one of your concerns, that there are so many physicians who are, not as happy as they thought they would be. And so I'm hopeful that doing things like writing or, having other aspects of your life that bring you joy can start to bring that joy back into the practice of medicine as well.
Sure. And, as I was listening to you, there's so many questions I could ask just based off that response. But one thing that came to mind is obviously you referred to students and why they go into medicine. But what was that driving force for you that made you want to go into medicine?
Oh, that's interesting. So I'm a different generation from you.
Sure.
And I wanted to go to medical school. I wanted to be a vet, but that quickly transferred into I want to be a doctor. But I actually finished college at a time when I enrolled in college, I enrolled as pre-med, and my college counselor said, "Oh, you can't do that because women don't get into medical school. So why don't you go to medical technology?" And then luckily the women's movement kicked in, and all of a sudden for women of my generation, it just opened so many doors, and all of a sudden schools like UCSF and Davis and other institutions. I'm from California, so those are two California medical schools. But other institutions started competing for who was going to be the first one to hit 50% women. So it was just absolutely a perfect time for me to be entering the field. But I don't know where the initial drive came from. I can just tell you from my earliest memory, that's what I wanted to do.
Wow.
And you know what? I still love it. And when I have people talk to me and they say, "Oh, I don't think I want my kid to go to medical school," I say, first of all, it's not really your choice. By the time your kids are ready to go to medical school, they're young adults. They get to choose what they want to do. But second, it's such a wonderful field, because even if you choose not to practice full time, or if you choose to practice part of your career but not all of your career, you still take that incredible knowledge and training and you can apply it to all sorts of other things, public health, for example, or the business of medicine like I did, or writing, or just a whole host of other things that you can use that training for and continue to learn and explore and as I said, just experience the joy of being in the field.
Wow. Yeah, I love that response. First off, it's fantastic that women are in medicine. It's great that we have a higher sense of equality. I mean, there's many areas where it might not be so equal, but it's great that, you were able to join the workforce. You obviously had this sense of wanting to do it from the beginning, and you still love, medicine. So was there anything specific in the work of medicine that gave you a lot of excitement and joy, or was it just the entire thing in general?
Well, since there may be some medical students listening, you might not relate to this, but I actually even liked the whole first 2 years, which in my medical school was all basic science. I actually liked that. And I really liked it when we started doing the clinical work. I was less enthusiastic as an intern. I found I was in training before they had the limitations of how many hours you could work. So I got to experience every third night on call, or when I did a surgical rotation for a couple of months, it was every other night on call. And I found it physically really draining and dispiriting. But then when I got out in practice, although I had trained in internal medicine and endocrinology, I started moonlighting in an ER at the very early days of emergency medicine. And that was it for me. That was just absolutely the perfect fit for me.
Sure. So let's say there's a student that's struggling and trying to figure out what they really jive with in terms of a specialty. What was it about emergency medicine that struck you as opposed to other fields? What kind of did it for you?
Well, I can tell you, I was just finishing up my endocrine fellowship, and we had worked up a patient who had an unusual condition, and you had to send the test out. It was called a VIPoma. I don't know if they even call it that anymore.
Yeah, of course.
And we had to send the lab test to 2 different places in the States to try and figure out what the level of this hormone was. And the results came back after a year, and they were conflicting. And I said to my attending, so what should we do? And he said, well, let's just send the tests again. And I thought, oh, my God. And then I started moonlighting in the ER. And people would come in really sick, really sick with asthma or having heart attacks or being septic or whatever. And you could, give them different medications, and just in the course of an hour or two, you could see improvement. And that just turns out to be my personality, right? That I really liked the doing the intervention and having the quick result, as opposed to the intellectual challenge of working somebody up for a year and then having to repeat the workup.
Right. So you really like that kind of more immediate impact that you could visibly see, and then having that action to be able to do it. That's awesome. That's great.
And I think people have to figure that out about themselves. I didn't know that when I was in training, because UCSF at that time didn't have emergency medicine. It didn't exist. That was the days of ophthalmologists moonlighting in the ER or whatever. I mean, it really wasn't its own field. So I think to whatever degree people can keep an open mind through their training, I would say most of the people in my training program at UCSF who were in internal medicine, ended up doing something besides internal medicine. And that might not have happened if they had had more experiences, earlier in their training, so they could really kind of understand what the match of their interests and their personality were with a particular specialty.
Sure. That's great. I mean, essentially, someone needs to kind of understand themselves and see how that specialty will fit with their personal personality and who they are. That's definitely a great tip.
There's lifestyle issues too. I'll just throw in another.
Yeah, of course.
My son was 4 when I went to medical school, so he grew up, having to sleep in the call room with me and stuff like that. And when he went to college, he said, I don't know what I want to do, but I know I'm not going to become a doctor. And then he said, well, I don't know what I want to do. I'm going to become a doctor, but I don't want to do what you do. I'm going to do what your husband does, which was research. And then ultimately he decided that he was going to go into emergency medicine, which was, what I was very involved in at the time. And 2 days before the match, he called me up. And this is a really important point. He called me up and he said, Mom, I'm making a lifestyle decision.
Oh, okay.
So I think you also want to factor in, how do you see, how is it that you want to live the rest of your life, which is really hard to think about, I think, when you're in the middle of medical school and residency and fellowship, because that is your life. And it's really hard to imagine what it's going to be like when you're done with the training. But I think it's an important point. For me, emergency medicine, where you worked really hard when you were on, but when you were off, you were off. You didn't have a call to deal with. That was an important part of the lifestyle decision for me. And, for my son, he made another decision, which led him into radiology, which has turned out to be a good decision for him.
Sure.
So whatever degree people can think about it, and try and have enough experiences before you go down the path. But even if you go down the path and it turns out to be wrong, don't worry about it. You can change.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And actually, to add on a story that comes to mind, actually in my own experience, I had a friend who was in between going into general surgery or pediatrics. And for all intents and purposes, he would have probably been a better surgeon than he would a pediatrician. He's going to be a great pediatrician. However, when he was in surgery, he would tell me how his hands just knew exactly what to do, and he knew the anatomy, and he got this real deep sense of excitement and fulfillment. But in terms of lifestyle, as you know, being a general surgeon is very consuming and life-encompassing in many ways. And he also is a family man, and he wants to start a family and be fulfilled and be there for his kids. So he was torn, and we had this conversation, and I said, what's more important to you, being a great father or being a fantastic surgeon? However, you're probably going to be very consumed in that field. And he really started to think about it, and he actually decided, you know what, family is my number one thing, and that's extremely important to me, so I'm going to go into pediatrics. So things aren't always so cut and dry. You know, he might have been really amazing as a surgeon, but it didn't ultimately fit into his concept of who he wanted to be.
Yeah, that's a great story. And I think for somebody like your friend, when you're at the beginning of starting your family, you kind of forget that it's really only about 20 years before kids are grown up, right? and they leave home. He can still be a surgeon. He just does it 20 years later.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of medicine, that you don't have to do the same thing for your entire career. You can take that knowledge and experience in your credentials and try a bunch of different things if that's the kind of lifestyle that you want to have.
Sure. And I think that's a really great point. Often, especially for us millennials, even though we hate being called that term, when we're under a lot of stress, and people in general, when you're under a lot of stress and you're worried about so many things all the time, you think very short term. And I love you bringing up this point of kind of the big, long-term picture, which is, things might be tough initially, or things might not be going in a direction you want, but on the big scale of life, things can move in a different direction. And I love your positive take on that. That's really cool. And something we should all be reminded of is that bigger picture sense.
Yeah, it's probably easier from my end of the age spectrum to look at and be able to say that than when you're in the middle. I do remember how all consuming it was in the middle of training, and really hard to think about, life after training. But it does exist, and life after family does exist. It doesn't mean that the family isn't still important to you, but you're not, wrapped up in, I got to get to the soccer game, or, all the kinds of things that, that make it tough to balance family life and work during the years when the kids are young.
Sure, definitely. Because the discussion is about happiness, I wanted to ask you, is there a specific time, a specific story or moment that brought you a lot of joy and fulfillment as being a physician?
Oh, that's really interesting. When I was practicing clinical medicine?
Yeah, when you were practicing, was there a specific moment that, really made you feel like, yes, this is what I wanted to do, and made you feel deeply fulfilled?
Well, there were so many when I was in the emergency department that I don't know if one sticks out in particular, but I think most of them revolved around, and I can mention one, which was a young woman who came in and everybody had thought she had asthma. By the way, I'm in the ER. I'm not, in the internal medicine clinic. And there was just something funny about her story and the way she told it, even though she'd seen a ton of docs and she was on all the asthma meds and everything. And I ended up getting an X-ray, and we diagnosed that she actually had a tracheal abnormality, and she actually ended up having to have surgery to replace the trachea. And it made me feel like, one doctor really paying attention, really listening to the story, even though the story's been told a jillion times, can make the difference in a patient's life. And I have a lot of stories like that because it really is about listening to the patient, putting it together with what you know about the clinical course, but really always paying attention. If you find yourself not paying attention, that's the time to maybe take a little walk around the block and come back in, because it can make the difference between getting to the right diagnosis and a good outcome for a patient and not getting there.
Right. And I think that's something that, we students kind of get caught up in is, we learn all of the numbers and we learn on the facts and we're memorizing all the stuff for the boards exams. And then so we get caught up in maybe the numbers or the diagnoses we see on the chart, and we get lost in it. But I have noticed the more trained and seasoned physicians, they're not so lost in all that stuff. They just literally just see who's in front of them. And the answers are usually pretty obvious when they pay attention. And that's
absolutely. Yeah. I had an incredible attending. She actually went on to become really famous in the area of helping of medical education and diagnosis. But she would walk in a room and she would talk to the patient, and then she'd ask him, "Well, do you mind if I take a look in your closet? The little closet in the hospital room." And she'd look at his shoes, and she would do all this stuff. And she'd come back, and she'd have this so much bigger picture of the patient, and was able to come to the diagnosis much more quickly and without ordering a whole ton of tests. I'm not anti-test; I love tests, but the idea that you listen and look and you put the patient back in their life, because in the emergency department, and it's probably this way in some clinics too, but we never saw a patient in their street clothes. By the time I'd see the person, they were already laying on the gurney. Right on the gurney, and sometimes you never even saw him standing up. I remember one patient in particular that I'd taken care of him for so many times because he was always coming in with diabetes out of control, and then one day I happened to be walking by after he was being discharged, and he stood up, and I realized, holy cow, he was really short. And I had no idea it was short because I only saw him laying in the gurney.
Right.
Then his mom comes in and starts talking about how he is a nationally known rock collector. And all those things, it changed my perspective on this patient. I now knew who he was. Now, that may not be if you're a pediatrician or a primary care doc and you're following your patients over long periods of time, but that's not actually the case for a lot of specialties in medicine, where you're just seeing people, kind of on an intermittent basis, and you don't really put them back in their lives. If you put them back in your lives, first of all, it's much more satisfying, I think, for you as a practitioner. But it also makes a huge difference in ultimately, I think, providing the right amount of care.
Right. Wow. And I love that. And I think at the end of the day, it's a human profession, and we should understand them on a human level. And it's great when you pick up those clues. I also loved what you said about the whole closet diagnosis thing, essentially, like that you would, once you saw how that person lived, it almost reminded me of, I don't know if you know the show House, where
I do.
Yeah, where in every episode they can't figure out the diagnosis, so they go to that person's home and they do all of this illegal stuff to figure out what's going on in their lives. If only it were that simple, huh?
Well, if only it was that simple. But I do think it may not be that simple, but I do think you could get a long ways if you really listen to the patient and try and fill out a much fuller story of what's going on with the person. And one example, and we've actually been doing a lot of stories recently on addiction, substance abuse and addiction.
Sure.
So not just opioids, but also alcohol. And if you think about alcohol, there's so much stigma around it that unless you're working someplace where, everybody's coming in intoxicated, and I trained in a place like that, people are often reluctant to give you that part of their history. And yet, if you fail to get that part of the history for whatever reason, because you didn't ask, or you didn't ask in a way where somebody actually felt like you really wanted to know the answer. Another example, I think, is domestic violence. I used to be involved in training doctors to do routine screening for domestic violence, but The downside was that people started asking, like in a checklist, and has anybody ever hit you? And, and so the message to the patient was, well, I could answer yes, but I'm not sure, first of all, that you care. And second, I'm not sure that I trust you with that information. And by not being open to the full story, you end up missing things, whether it's substance abuse or domestic violence or some other social aspect of the person's life that impacts their health, that you end up missing it.
Sure. And that actually kind of reminds me of the way we normally do the review of systems, where it's kind of like, have you had cough? Have you ever had any case of asthma? Anything, any production, any chest pain. When you do it so quick, I feel like once they get into that whole line of string of no's, even if they might have some of the symptom, sometimes I wonder if it's even an effective way of really asking those questions, because it's not a very natural form, and obviously it's rushed. And of course, you really dig into their chief complaint and all of that. But you bring up that thought in my mind of, is that really the effective way of us really digging into this person's health history?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. And I wonder, so as part of my work, we spend a lot of time, because I live close to Silicon Valley, talking to people who are innovating in digital health. And I sometimes wonder, if we have the tools now, how about allowing the patient to tell the story, either with an audio like we're doing, or with writing, but they do it before they get in the office. So they're not stressed and you're not stressed, and you have time to read it ahead of time. And you can start to, and maybe part of it's prompted where you would include, well, don't forget to tell me about your family and your pets, or what your goals are, or whatever. That if you got that more well-rounded picture of the patient before you come into that, the tyranny of the 15-minute office visit, if that wouldn't get us off to a better start, as opposed to, like you say, running down a checklist where you may convey that you're not really that interested, it's perfunctory, and the person may, not feel like it's really all that important to tell you what's going on.
Yeah, actually, you kind of inspired some ideas in my head as you were saying that. I was like, oh, if like a patient, maybe, obviously with technology now you can basically do this, but if a patient recorded themselves and sent it to the physician beforehand, and maybe the doctor could review it, at 1.5, 2 times speed. And there's also programs that are starting to get better at auto transcribing. How great would it be for you, for example, or for me in the future, if a patient already told me kind of what was going on in audio form and also in written form, and I had that before they came in, then we could just focus on, digging in deeper and solving the issues that kind of came up. That's actually a really great concept.
Yeah, I'm very excited about the application of these new technologies to the practice of medicine.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, and I think pertinent to our conversation, how many young people I've met who come out to Silicon Valley and they've dropped out of medical school. And I remember the first person I met, he was in a Harvard MD MBA program, and he told me he was on leave. I couldn't believe it. I said, I can't believe you're doing that. How could, nobody in my class would have done anything like that. Well, he went on to found a company that's really quite successful, and it's helping to prevent the development of diabetes from prediabetes.
Wow.
And so in a sense, by dropping out of a Harvard MD MBA, which I don't know exactly what he would have done with that, but he's now reaching many more people than he would have reached, say, if he'd become a primary care doc or a diabetologist.
Sure.
And not that one is better than the other, but it just shows you this, how many different opportunities there are in medicine to be able to make a difference in people's lives and have a long and satisfying career.
Absolutely. And for that individual who went and decided to do that, that took a lot of guts, to say, I'm going to go for this business idea and let's see where it takes me. those things are difficult. I'm sure we could discuss this too. Is for me, starting this podcast was a pretty difficult idea. I was worried about what people might think of me. I was worried. I was obviously in the process of applying to residency at that time. I was concerned about how this might affect my application. There's a lot of fears that can come up when you start to put yourself out there or go for an idea that you believe in. Did you feel like that at all with the Doctor Weighs In?
Oh, sure. And I was going to say to you, I bet people fed into those fears too by saying, oh, you better really be careful about what you're talking about, or, and I actually recently did have the experience of, I got offered a very cool job. But somewhere along the line between typing up the offer and conveying it to me, they discovered the blog. Not that I kept it a secret, but I think somebody went over and looked at the stuff that I was writing about, because I write about what I'm interested in, and some of it's political, particularly, in the context of what's happening with repeal and replace and so forth.
Sure.
And so they actually withdrew the offer. Well, so that's a fear that plays out. But on the other hand, for me, it put front and center for me what was the most important thing was to have one more big consulting job, or to continue to do what I'm doing in the space of health news and health journalism or health opinion or whatever you call it, what I'm doing. I haven't quite come up with whatever the right word is.
Sure.
Which is very satisfying to me. It makes me feel good. It keeps me learning new things, meeting people like you, meeting all sorts of interesting people that are innovating in healthcare, and so it really drew the line. But I think for people listening and hearing you express your concerns and hearing that story, yeah, they're going to have fears, but sometimes you just have to roll the dice.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing I've noticed, having interviewed, a lot of people doing new, exciting, or creating these visions that they've always wanted to, is the positive impact it's had on their lives by far outweighs that fear or concern. I mean, to hear the energy that these people have in their lives and the excitement for the things that they do, ultimately is, again, it's by far more fulfilling, again, to express their voice than being concerned about the other people's opinions. And reflecting on your story, I mean, would you want to work with an environment that didn't want to cultivate or support, what you're doing? Maybe what you're doing is in fact a screening tool to block out those people that don't believe in your mission.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. But I think you have a point. I think that whole experience was, for me, like I said, calling the question, and what is it that you want to do at this particular point in your life that really brings you happiness, and yet also fits into the lifestyle that I want to have at this particular point in time. And again, I just want to remind your listeners that you can have many careers over the course of your working life that all tie into medicine, or maybe even sometimes don't tie into medicine. So
sure.
You're making this investment in learning to be a good doctor right now. That's not a wasted investment, no matter what it is that you turn out to do. I mean, there are doctors that have gone to Wall Street and become people who advise on stocks of healthcare companies. There's docs that end up in research. There's, just so many different ways to take that background and put it to good use, both to make yourself happy, but to also, we're a helping profession. I think maybe I'm going to exaggerate, but it seems to be that most people are attracted to medicine because of that, because it's a helping profession and they want to do something that will help other people.
Sure, absolutely. And something that I took away from what you just said, and it's funny, this is actually on my wall. I wrote this out at one point because I needed to remind myself of this. I think in our society today, there's a lot of looking for instant gratification in things. And a main takeaway that you've kind of reminded us throughout this conversation is to look at the bigger picture and that things can move in a variety of directions and you don't have to necessarily have everything at once. And so on my wall, it says, trust and believe in the journey. So, trust the journey that's unfolding and believe in it. And we often get really stressed out about how things might be happening in the acute sense, but when you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, it's not so daunting and scary.
Well, yeah, that's really great. Trust and believe in the journey. That's absolutely perfect. And it sounds like you're doing that, Taylor.
I'm trying to. I'm not perfect by any means, but it's constantly a process. So moving on to one question I did want to ask you. You're doing a lot of great things, obviously, and something that I'm interested in always is what is your top personal tip on seizing the day and building a successful daily routine into your life?
That's interesting. Well, I believe in really hard work, so I have to tell you that even in training, I was one of those people that read. I don't know, is Harrison still around?
Yeah, of course.
Carried these huge textbooks around, and I actually read it from cover to cover because I wanted to know everything there was to know about medicine, and that's kind of what I do in this work as well. Is that I really think it's important to maybe like a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout to be prepared, to be sure you've done your homework and then be willing to do the hard work that it takes to get whatever it is that you want, and then not kick yourself too hard, because in addition to being prepared and doing hard work, luck also plays a role. So you might try something. I started a business about 15 years ago that would have been a raging success if I would have started it 10 years later. So you won't be successful at everything that you do, but it certainly shouldn't stop you from trying to do that. And then I think the other thing is it's really important to surround yourself with people who are kind of like-minded, who not echo chamber like-minded, but are also turned on to medicine and turned on to life and turned on to trying new things, and can become people that you can bounce ideas off as you go through that journey.
Yeah. Wow. So hard work and good connections. I love it. That's awesome. That's great. And it goes to show, I mean, you're doing a lot of great stuff. And had I showed up to the emergency room, I would have almost have wished you were my physician at the time.
Not now. I can tell you wouldn't want me to try and intubate you.
My gosh. Not anymore, huh? You have to get your practice back in.
Yeah, those skills actually fade away.
Sure, I'm sure. Yeah, with the hands-on skills, I'm sure it kind of you have to end up like refining every once in a while and fine-tuning all of that stuff, I'm sure. With that being said, well, Patricia, like it's been awesome to have you on. I leave the next part to you. Is there anything that you would like to leave to the listeners, a tip or something that maybe you leave to medical students and the younger doctors that you feel would be important for them to know?
Sure. So since I threw out most of my tips already, I think that I will just close by telling people that they should read The Doctor Weighs In, to thedoctorweightsin.com, and that if you think that writing is something that you want to do or you want to explore it, we're really good at responding to emails. It's info@thedoctorweightsin.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you want to write, we're happy to take a look at what you wrote and give you feedback. And if that's the part of the path that you want to go on, then I say just go for it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure to have you. That was a great conversation.
Thank you, Taylor. Good luck with what you're doing.
All right. Take care. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we want you to definitely subscribe to our social media channels. Check out the Happy Doc on Facebook, iTunes, Twitter, and Instagram. Please like, subscribe, share, and send us feedback. And please check out the website, www.thehappydoc.com. Again, we hope you enjoyed The Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians. Peace out.